Hello, everyone. Welcome. Good evening. In my case, because I'm in California right now, good late afternoon. If you're tuning in for the first time, this is the La Maison de Rouge Monday night weekly live broadcast. I'm your host, Lucy Sweetkill, one half of the duo that is La Maison de Rouge. A little bit about who we are. LMDR is dedicated to expanding the BDSM experience by discussing, educating, and informing our audiences about the intersections of kink, wellness, sexuality, spirituality, and social activism. We aim to create a safe space for discussing these topics, as well as providing an avenue for our guests to share their stories and experiences. Thank you again for joining us. Tonight, our guest is a sex educator, a mental health professional, a wrestler, a pro-dom, and a world record holder for volume squirting solo. We'll definitely get into that. Providing the No Frills Sex Education we all need and deserve, she strives to bring a refreshing understanding to sex, sexuality, and kink to push individuals past what they think they are capable of. Please welcome, pronouns she and her, Lola Jean. Welcome, Lola. How are you?
Thank you. I am doing well.
It's been a crazy week, last week, definitely. So, I think many of us some are very relieved, or some of us are really waiting to see what happens, right? So it's been interesting the last few days.
Yeah, it's a tough act to follow, right?
So why don't we kind of get right into it? Our first question whenever we have a new guest is to ask about your origin story. How did you, I listed a lot of things that you're titled, have done. Obviously, there's a story, there's a journey that got you there. So, let us know how that all came about.
Yeah, it's funny because it all happened at the same time. So that's the reason it all kind of continues in that way. But it was a period of my life. I called it was my second sexual revolution. I had a first sexual revolution in my early 20s. This was like my mid to late 20s. And this one was different because it was more about my pleasure than me just trying things and doing things. It was with just a bit more, specificity in mind. And as I was doing this, I had also quit my job in advertising. So I was really just having, I guess if you want to call it a quarter life crisis, it fits that bill a little bit. But as I was doing this, exploring my own sexuality, exploring kink, having a lot of group sex, I also had gotten fired from my waitressing job. And I was like, well, maybe I can do some things in the sex and kink world. And it was within that time where I was like, I want to do a job I don't hate and I need money. And that's when I met someone answering a Craigslist ad. And that's how I found out about wrestling. That's not when I did wrestling for the first time, but it's when I found out about it. And that's at the same time that I started domming personally, lifestyle wise. And I realized that I liked it and I had a knack for it. So then a couple months after that, I started working in a dungeon, started seeing people independently, more so in wrestling after that. And all at that same time too is when I started in sex education. And I started, my very first class was Femdom 101. And it all was kind of at the same time. And now it's so much more than that. But really all of that stuff, it's kind of crazy of how fast everything happened and the whirlwind in which it happened too. But I remember there was a moment that I told my therapist, I was like, this is going to either be the next chapter of the rest of my life, or it's going to be a fucking fun detour. And that was when I put all my eggs in the basket of everything to do with sex and kink. And I said bye to Muggle life.
Well, those two options sound good. It's either going to be the last chapter that you're gonna go down, or a really fun detour. Either way, you're not going to lose, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So then what was your first sexual awakening? What was that like?
That was just me being straightforward and slutty and just being like, I want to have sex with you, so I'm going to have sex with you. I want to do that, so I'm going to do that. Like, what it was a lot of that, but I didn't put in precautions for myself to keep myself safe and sane. I had to honestly do like a lot. I had probably a celibacy period after that because it hurt a lot and there was a lot I had to recoup. So I took the learnings from that to the second one. But there were just like a lot of people in and out of my bed. I couldn't say if I probably had some orgasms. I don't know if it was a lot of orgasms. It was just really collecting experiences than more about like the feeling or what was happening.
Yeah. So that's very interesting that you recognize, like, you're not talking about it as this like traumatic experience. Like, you are almost like, I really like how you're kind of saying, like, I was exploring and I was just doing stuff. Some was good, some was bad. And you had to process all of that, it seems like. And that celibacy period was that, for you to process that. So do you see it as do you just see it as a total learning lesson, or was there aspects of trauma in there, or how do you frame it for yourself?
I think, I think with a lot of it and why I do what I do now is like, I absolutely wish my younger self had someone like me or my peers and I wouldn't have gone through so much shit, but like, that's what's gotten me to where I am. The way I guess refer to it. So I was bullied by predominantly women, pretty much all women, from when I was in like third grade through college. And that was trauma. And that prepared me to be able to like have agency and deal with things. So a lot of the things that happen afterwards, especially sexually and then especially with men, my therapist and I kind of refer to those as like micro traumas. And it's more of like everything together and it happening continuously. But I still have trouble sometimes registering of like, oh, that was messed up, that thing that happened. I wasn't registering it at the time, but I also had a very strong sense of self and independence because being bullied all those years, I was like, I'm not good at picking friends because they turn into my bullies or I acquire new ones. So I forced myself to become very comfortable by myself, doing activities by myself, being able to enjoy that.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. I think that those challenges you deal with when you're younger build like how strong you are. I find that a lot of DOMs have that similarity. Like, there was a lot of shit they dealt with, and then you like learn your power, right? You're just like, fuck this. And then you just like grab on.
I remember a moment when I worked at a commercial dungeon and I think there was a bunch of DOMs in like the holding area and someone was just like, so we all were bullied when we were younger? Okay. So this is just like revenge bully fantasy.
I think like when you deal with that though, you understand power dynamics, right? Because that's what it is. Mm-hmm. It's a bully is someone who is trying to assert power because they feel out of control or they don't feel like they have power. It's so cheesy to say, but it tends to be true when you're younger, right?
And they're grabbing it in ways that aren't sustainable or don't make sense. And when you learn domination professionally or personally, you're learning the language and the math when it comes to power dynamics. So then you can understand how they work.
Yeah. And you're knowing what to kind of do with them. It's not just like, unconsciously doing stuff, right? It's a lot of awareness, consciousness, intention behind how you play with it instead of, it's kind of like playing with fire. Do you know what you're doing? Or are you just like setting crap on fire and just burning everything? Mm-hmm. So if we go back further from your first kind of sexual exploration and go into your adolescence, right? What have you been able to spot moments of kink and power dynamics and the things you're into now in their seed form back then?
It's interesting because, like, I mean, sexually speaking, I've always been a very forward person where it's like, if it's not going to happen to me, my Disney fairy tale didn't happen to me, so I'm going to try to go out and make these things happen. Oh, I'm not in love, but I still want to have sex. So you over there, this is what's going to happen. And I mean, my second sexual experience was a threesome with 2 men. So I was like, just straight out of the gate, like, let's get weird. So that, and then, like, I remember my friends were always like, oh, like, you have all these wild stories. Like, I was always a person with the weird sexual stories. So, like, that part kind of seems on par, but it's funny when I feel like when I unlocked, like, where I stand within BDSM, it more makes, like, my regular life make sense. So the fact that I'm a bratty dom, and when I'm working, if I don't have my own autonomy, I shut down and I don't try. I need a certain type of motivation that's not someone listing out the things that I have to do, but giving me an idea and letting me be on my own. And it's like, oh, that's why I got fired from those jobs. Oh, that's why I didn't try in school this way. So it's like those things start making sense because those are at the core of who you are. You're just playing with that when it comes to BDSM. So, I mean, yeah, sexually, I've always been, not a stranger to the weird at all. I think, like a lot of doms, I got my start in kink thinking that I like submission. But it turns out I don't like submission. I just like attention. Like, I thought I liked being
That's
spanked.
That's a really great line.
Yeah. Like, I don't like pain. I really don't. But I was like, oh, I don't like being spanked for pain. I like it because I get attention. Yeah.
I love that. Like, that's I just like being the center of attention.
Yeah.
Was there anything that influenced you on that kind of being so sexually open? Did you have that kind of family structure? Were you surrounded by like support networks that were like, open to that? Like, what was your upbringing that that kind of came about? Because I had a very different upbringing.
Yeah, those are always interesting.
My shit was shoved down deep.
I mean, like, the thing too is, like, I don't come from a shame background at all. So I wasn't like in a super religious household. It wasn't that sex is wrong, you don't do it. Like, honestly, I think my parents' like biggest fear is that I would be like naked on the internet and like, whoops.
Well, that's out the window.
Or like in public kind of a thing. It's like, yeah, I do that now too. But I think, I mean, I was always just really curious about sex. I didn't come from a very, like, I would say sex positive household or sex forward household. I think a lot of things within media, it's not like the slut narrative was being forced down my throat or anything like that, but I definitely gravitated toward it. I remember as like a teenager watching One Tree Hill, and I was like, I like that Brooke character. She just does what she wants, and she hooks up with everyone. Like, I was just drawn to it innately, but it did get romanticized by the media and fed me something different than what I probably needed to prepare myself for being that type of a slut. So I think a bit influenced by the media, but I was always curious both in how to, I mean, especially I grew my boobs like kind of out of nowhere. And then I just kind of became a sexual object for people. So it was reconciling with that as well too. Especially just, I mean, I have a whole relationship with my boobs, which they're great now, but that was definitely a struggle of like, same thing with my sexuality. It's like, do I hide behind it? Do I like put that as a mask in front of me? Do I not acknowledge it? And it's always been that struggle. Yeah.
Yeah. You're the girl in school who grew boobs before everybody else, huh?
I don't know if it was before, but they were definitely bigger than ever.
Yeah, I think that's hard because automatically you get placed into that objectified, sexualized role, right? And then you've got all these, you got girls who are like, well, why don't I have that? And then there's all these feelings around it. And then you have all these boys who are like, maybe just like staring you down because they don't really know how to deal with the hormones.
Because it's like, even though I was a sexual object, like no one desired me. Like I didn't go on dates. I didn't
Yeah.
have partners, but I was still sexualized. So that was really confusing.
Yeah. Well, because that's the other thing is like a lot of times, back then too, like our sex education is crap, right? So then you've got all these like boys and girls who don't know how to handle their hormones, don't know how they should be feeling, most probably are just learning porn, back then and on the internet. And then also too scared and nervous to, ask you out or any of that. And so they just sit there and look at you, you know.
Yeah. I just had this it's kind of like flashback to it, but a lot of, I think especially why it's like, duh, this is my career now is that I have my first partner, like we just started dating in quarantine, first partner of like life, first serious relationship. So I mainly I learned how to communicate via sex because I didn't date anyone. There were no like romantic interests, like that did not happen all throughout high school, college, after college, really until I came to New York. So sex is I'm so comfortable sexually, more so than a lot of other things. And it was kind of as a result of that.
Wow, that is so interesting. Yeah, that God, I don't even know what sexual freedom, that was like, like I hid all of that for so many years. I had so much trauma around just sex and my body and stuff like that, that it was just kind of packed in. I was just like, let's just hide that in the corner. And then it wasn't until sex work and domination work where I learned to really, I think for me, it was recontextualizing all of that. Right. But it seems like in your case, that's what you had in the forefront. And now your first experience with partnership.
Yeah, it's not easy.
And so I want to ask you about that because this is something that we talk about quite often on, on our show is dating while being a sex worker. That is a big, big subject, right? A big thing. There's all sorts of up and downs with that. So how's that been looking like for you?
I mean, with my current partner, it's great. He's really supportive of my sex work. There's absolutely no judgment there. He doesn't understand it or maybe derive the same joy that if something happens a session and I want to tell some of my friends about it, he doesn't really understand that, but he's always like, as long as you're having fun, as long as you're doing what you want to do. He particularly, I'm someone who likes to monetize off of anything I'm already doing because I'm already doing it. So he doesn't like it if I bring in work into our sex. So that's where it has to stay separate too, but that's also his boundary. I think in general, though, when it comes to being a sex worker and dating, I'm really unabashed and upfront, and I have the privilege of not having to hide my sex work from my identity, reality, and all of those things. But I already inhabit so many things that could be a complete turnoff for someone. The fact that I'm a sex worker and a sex educator, and that's what I do for a living, the fact that I am a squirter, if someone isn't able to have that conversation with me and have difficult conversations about it, then we're just not going to get along because I've already reconciled with who I am and my past and my potential future. And that person, I mean, the thing I love the most about my partner too, it's actually not, I shouldn't say the most, but the thing I love about my partner is especially of how he treats my squirting. He doesn't love it. He doesn't hate it. He's just like, it's just a thing your body does. And I like you and your body does this thing. So therefore it's the full package because sometimes I fucking hate it and I want him to hate it with me.
But that's so sweet where he's just like, I love you and your body does that. So
And I think it's the same thing with sex work. It's like you love your person and that's what they do. I mean, in the ideal world of words, I could come back from my sex work job and be like, oh my God, I said the funniest thing in this session, or like this, look what my pay pig just texted me. I can't share that with him, but then I just share it with my sex work friends instead.
Yeah, that's a thing. I can do that. I can share a certain amount with my partner. Doesn't want to know the details, but I have a tendency to be like, look at this. And I'm just like, watch this video with me. And he's just like, you do horrible things in the most supportive way, because I call him, he doesn't like this. He's, and I would want to know, my partner is what I call vanilla plus. He thinks he's kink light. He's more vanilla plus. Mm-hmm. But he's the most supportive person. He loves what I do. He is my biggest cheerleader. He helps me with photos, where I'm just like, babe, how does my strap on look? Like, tell me if he's just like, it's looking good. I was like, okay, I need you to take a photo. So he's quite supportive. He understands it theoretically, even if he, and he has his kinks. He has his kinks and his fantasies. He doesn't want to live them out, which I, appreciate and totally understand, and am usually trying to teach other people, you don't have to live out all your fantasies.
Yeah.
Some are better in your head.
I think it's that the sex work mentality, I think, is harder for partners in dating, for people to get around than just sex work, because I don't have a 9 to 5 and I don't just turn off after work, or I don't just have like, oh yeah, my weekends are free, or you're kind of always hustling. And that's a hard thing to let go of.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest struggle with dating a sex worker. Actually, my biggest struggle with my partner is the fact that I'm always text, email, this Sex Panther, night flirt calls, appointments, video calls, work, and like promoting this, like, because you run everything. And so there is it's hard to have like most, you most probably understand this, like a lot of my Sex Panther stuff happens at night. So while he's ready to like chill out, I'm on, my laptop talking to people. And so I think that's really the hardest part sometimes, is like he always goes like, I don't see you. I feel very lonely. I was like, well, you know what? I got to hustle. This pandemic is not helpful for sex workers. Okay. I got to hustle.
Yep.
Yeah. So is your partner kinky?
No, I would say maybe more in the vanilla plus. I'm like trying to be very encouraging, because I think he's curious, but it's also going at his pace. I don't need kink in my like primary partnership. I just need it somewhere in my life. And
I relate to that.
I love power play and power dynamics. That's what I like dealing with. And I think because he's someone who's like such a sensitive man, I'm just like, I would sub for you. I would do that, because that's like the difference of that power dynamic.
I totally get that. Not the subbing part, but like the power dynamics are very much more. But I am definitely someone who loves just always being the top. And I like to he's not a bottom and he's not a sub by any means. And so I kind of like to push my power onto him. I was like, you'll let me do it because you love me. He's just like, why are you doing horrible things to me? Do this to someone else. You have other people to do this to. I was like, it's because you don't want me to.
I think my partner would be into doming, or I think they would be a switch too, but it's, I think a lot of people have a different idea of what it is even in their head, even if they're dating a sex worker, and even if they have the wool pulled from over their eyes. But it's, we got to go into it at our own pace, and
that's awesome.
It's always there. If they want to explore it, I'm there to explore it too.
So you've gone, you've always been this kind of sexually forward person. You've gone through some sexual awakenings, too, that you've known of, but maybe some more in time. So where are you at now?
Personally,
with your work, personally, all of it.
It's interesting with my work, and it probably honestly echoes itself all throughout my personal life, because I feel like my personal life, I'm in my first relationship, I'm like, let's find this stuff out, let's be in love, let's see all the difficult shit that comes with the relationships too. And and personally, in a lot of my work within sex education and activism and things like that, it's really taking a non-sexual shift as well. So it's hard because sex does sell, and that's what people want more of. They want the squirting and the pegging and all those things. But I've created a lot of these video series and classes up to like my standards that people can watch, and I can sell them and monetize that way. And what I'm really trying to focus on is a lot more of self-betterment in a way. I guess it's the best way of putting that. But sexual harassment education and teaching not about consent in like the really, lackadaisical way that we teach it, but really going in depth on it, that of consent and confidence being intrinsically linked to each other, and starting a fake university called the Rehab Center for Insecure Adults with two of my colleagues that discusses power in depth, and both the responsibility of power, how to get it, how you give it away in ways that you don't know, and really just the building blocks of confidence, because that's what BDSM and domination taught me. It presented it in a different way, but you don't have to dom to be confident and to get confidence and to understand power, because power is everywhere, no matter what. That, and really, it's really more just, it gets more non-sexual the further I go. It's interesting that way. Just trying to, especially now in a global pandemic where I just think the worst things are right in front of us and we can't look away. And it's hard to want to tell someone how to squirt when everyone's just kind of being a dick to each other. Yeah. It's like, okay, how can we make a world a better place? How can we have people have those difficult conversations and be uncomfortable and work through that discomfort instead of avoiding those? And I think a lot of what my sex education already did was challenging norms. Because, we always want to be the person that we didn't have growing up. And just the fact that I'm more of a dominant female, like that wasn't represented. It was all like sexual submissive women. That was the only thing that was presented in media. That's a lot of the things that are presented in sex education. It was all coupled. It wasn't single people. It was assuming that you had a partner. So it's continuing to do that. But I feel like when it comes to a lot of the sex things, I'm almost not getting bored by it, but my bratty self needs to find different things that challenge me, because I get more excited when there's a challenge.
Totally. Well, I also think I think this is a natural personal evolution. I've seen this with tons of DOMs and any provider over time, right? They start to go into the education work because I think that's what we need, right? We need to help educate folks about these arenas that none of us ever got educated around. And that self-betterment is, that's everlasting. That information people are going to be getting from your videos and from these projects, what we're doing even on this Periscope. It's so important for people to hear the stories, get the information, and see how they can apply it in their life, because the sex is already going to be there. There's so many people who are doing that already and will continue. There's a lot of people making porn, will continue to make porn. Porn will never stop. Someone offering sex of any kind, sex work will never stop. I think what really lacks is the education aspect, and the people who should be doing the educating are the people who are involved in it directly, the people who've experienced it, know so much about it, right? Compared to the education that's been put together has been so either very medical, and very removed, or none at all, or people who don't have the background to do the education work.
Yeah, that was always very important to me, again, of seeing where I didn't feel represented, is that I was I want someone who's doing the shit that they are telling you about. And it's important to me too, is if I ever speak from my own experience, to include two experiences that are not my own, because I also don't want to be one of those people that's just well, I did it, therefore this is the way.
Yeah.
if it's going to be a study, there needs to be repetition and trial.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And that is so important. So what, we kind of talked about a few of your projects, right? And so this fake university, tell us more about that, and then some of the other projects you're working on.
Yeah, so the Rehabilitation Center for Insecure Adults is a fake university for getting your shit together. We said, think of it like self-help meets boot camp. And it's something, I am one of the headmistresses along with Lady Euphoria and Mistress Shayla. But don't be fooled, just because a bunch of doms are running it doesn't mean it has anything to do with BDSM. A lot of it and a lot of the instructors is we're taking a lot of the principles of BDSM, but it's all real world applicable. So the foundational series is Stepping Into Your Power. It's a 10-week, 10-episode course on power, and it goes so in depth. I was editing the first episode and I was like, we need a dictionary in there and breaks and quizzes, because there is a lot of words, a lot of defining, but these things are so complicated. But it's important to understand, not just for people who want confidence in getting power, but it's also understanding your privilege and understanding your power and understanding that it's really not what we see it in as it is in the media. But this course and this project, the fake university, like that's really what I'm focusing 2021 on. It's fun to make as well, but we get to touch on a lot of things like, how to spot a gaslighter, breakup boot camp, rejection boot camp, all of these like real life things that we have so much trouble dealing with and having conversations. And we're just giving them a little tools of the Dom almost, and being able to understand these different concepts and then how to sit through them instead of trying to like optimize or trying to like hack your masculinity and hack your life. It's understanding these things. Being a good person means you don't always have to be right, means you don't always have to talk. And there's so many people that we want to bring in there, but that's one that I'm super excited about because everyone can use something from that. Power dynamics are everywhere. They're so interesting. And I find even just from editing our first chapter of it, you just start looking around and surveying everyone. You're like, oh, that's unsustainable power, or that's power is self-inflating, or whatever it may be. It just helps you, I think, look at the world. As someone who loves social psychology, it's going to have a lot of that in it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So how's it set up? Or how is it going to be set up?
It's going to be set up where it's ideally a subscription model, so you can have access to all of these courses. And it's going to be like kind of a school course. So the idea is you'll get the 10 weeks and it'll become released as that goes on. There'll be case studies, there will be homework. We wanted to do this in person in addition to online, but obviously that changed when we started working on it. So now it's just only online. But we want it to be week by week, and you can just come in for office hours. It's like a community college that you're really looking forward to. But we're still working on the process of setting it up, but something very similar to like, Teachable and things like that are already out there. We want to create content that's dynamic, that you'll watch, that's also a little bit funny, but we're really putting a lot of work and effort into what that content is.
That's awesome. That sounds great. And when are you guys projecting that to be done?
It's like, how fast can I video edit? Probably, I would say maybe the spring of next year. We have a lot of time set aside. We have weekly co-work, sex work sessions, but probably next year. What we are working on, though, in the meantime, that's kind of like the sister project to that is the 7 Days of Domination, which Dia was on in, I believe, the last round. And that one is related to BDSM. So that one, it's 7 days with seven different DOMs. And it shows you different types of domination and sheds lights on to like different concepts or ideas, because all of us have our specialties, and those are the things that we're probably both good at and that we enjoy. And it's being able to see, I think, how multifaceted domination is.
Totally. Yeah, I think it's been really great, your guys's, because you have done it twice.
Yeah, we've done it twice, and we're doing the third one in December. It's the 12 Days of Domus. So there's 12. It's like a kinky advent calendar.
Yeah.
It's going to be a lot.
Yeah. I hope to be part of, not because I can't be part of December just because I
Mm-hmm.
won't be around, but hopefully when you guys do it next year that, I can participate, because I think it's really amazing what you guys are doing. I think it's very helpful for any folks, bottom, top, kinky, curious, whichever. It's, the education is very good, and doing it in kind of a setting that doesn't feel overly intimidating, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think what the interesting thing about that too is, I mean, we just started it because we're like, okay, how do we make our friends some money and do this thing? Let's see if it tanks. And it just kind of skyrocketed, but so much so in like baby doms and like the dom community of being, because like we learned stuff from it too. And I think it's also a testament that like we offer a really hefty discount if you're a professional, because it's learning the trade as to if you are a bottom or a lifestyler or whatever it may be.
Yeah, totally. So those are the projects that you're fully focused on right now.
Yeah, those. And then I have my online educational series called Quick and Dirty. The first episode is on pegging. The second episode is on squirting. And then probably in kind of around the spring as well, I'll do the third episode, which we haven't filmed yet, which will be wrestling for lovers and erotic asphyxiation, which I co-teach with LT, who is my wrestling trainer, who taught me how to wrestle for money.
That's awesome. I do not do wrestling. I've tried it, and I was just like, nope, not my thing.
Yeah, and I love it so much. But I'm such a competitive person. I love working out, and I like winning. It's like all the things that I like and I'm good at, it involves itself with. When I've told people from like high school or when I was younger and I tell them about wrestling specifically, they're like, oh, that makes sense for you. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't like body fluids in the sense that I don't like sweat being like on me. And I don't sweat, even when I work out, I don't sweat heavily because I think it's just an Asian thing. So like, I'm very like body sweat. Like I can do all sorts of play, strap on play, all of that and not have any issue. Like I do medical and blood and all these things, but something about like hands-on wrestling body sweat for me just does not work. I'm just like, no. And also, I'm not a big fan of feeling body hair on me either. And, one of the funny things is my partner doesn't have much body hair. And I actually said that. I was like, I like the fact that you don't have much body hair. He's like, really? Why? And I was just like, I have this weird thing with body hair. Like for someone who has so much hair on top of my head, I have this, it's my own little stuff around it. And so that's why like wrestling for me, I'm just like, tried it a bit, especially when I was a baby dom. And then I was like, and I believe that you got to try stuff, see how it goes, try it in different ways. And then you can say, that's for me, or, that's not for me. Right. So
100%.
Well, let's open it up to questions for anybody. If you have actually, there is a question, but I'm going to, audience out there, if you have a question for Lola, please put it up if it's respectful, because unfortunately there are some non-respectful ones that I'm not going to place up, but there is a question, which is, as a cis female submissive with a religious background, do you have any books, articles to suggest?
I mean, outside of that, like specific of it being for submissive with a religious background, whenever people ask for recommendations, especially when it comes to domination, I always end up referring to psychology books or things based in that. So some of the ones I thought that were interesting were Bonk by Mary Roach, which is about the history of sex and science. And I think especially if you have a religious background, that just kind of shows you how like stupid humans are and about what we've been teaching people and how it's just like, what? We were studying porcupines to tell us about human sexuality? and I think as if you have a religious background, that's a good one to start out with because it lets you know how little that we know. And one that was like, I remember someone gave it to me actually when I started doming. They're like, you're going to need this. And it's been such a game changer is The Art of Seduction by Robert Greene, who also wrote the 48 Laws of Power. And while it's not like a guide of like, here's how you like dom someone or here's how you seduce someone, it's basically books of power dynamics. And without taking, here's how you take this from certain people, it's just presenting that of like, here are certain weaknesses. And if you like to dom ethically, which you should, then you can understand things from that matter. And if you're submissive, if you're ever learning about domination, you're learning about submission. So you can just read that through the submissive lens. When I teach a Femdom 101 class, it's just as much for subs as it is for doms because it all revolves around each other.
Definitely. I've read I've read The Art of Seduction, like actually when I was not into domination work yet or any of that. It was like a little bit ago. And I just was interested because psychology, it's all about the psychology. And if you do enough reading about psychology, then everything about BDSM kind of falls into place. It makes more sense because it's all motives. Because when it comes back to it, it's different people's motives, things that drive them. And it's all power dynamics. Recently, I've been, in this question too, I've been reading this, trying to get the title right now, this series of books called Emotional Intelligence Mastery by David Clark. And it's a series of books around emotional intelligence, cognitive behavioral therapy, anger management, self-discipline, how to analyze people, manipulation, empath. And I'm reading it because even though there's a lot of the stuff that I've read before and gone over and studied, it's just like reaffirming some of those things, to spot, manipulation, because it's also ways of being able to play with it, And so I think the more you educate yourself on like, okay, here's how it can be done in this very unethical way and how people might do it in just day-to-day dynamics that you can spot. But it's also stuff I use to kind of like, oh, how can I use some of these things in my play that, create a more real and intense situation. So I've also I find that reading a lot around military and police interrogation tactics are also very good.
I also like interviewing tactics.
Yes. Those are very, because I love interrogation scenes, I'm also a life coach. It's just how you pose questions in the series of questions, you start to get a lot about people. You get out and people are then all of a sudden like, how did I just reveal all this shit to you?
Yeah.
And that's the fun part,
I find that it's not like learning about other people's careers. It helps you see certain things about domination. Like when I learned about what a mentalist does is they're not hypnotizing you or reading your mind. They're inserting something into your mind for you to say or do. And it's like, that is fucking bonkers.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so important to like look at all these other, like I was watching the series around how they like started profiling. So profilers, especially for serial killers, psychopaths and stuff, like reading and about how profiling started. And it started because there was a series of serial killers and they were just like, what is happening, right? And so they started working on how to create profiling. And that was very new, the idea of profiling. And it was all based in psychology. And it was a group of folks who came together that were a mix of like psychologists, behavioralists, as well as like actual like law enforcement, right? And then created kind of that profiling, which we see on like CSI and like all the other stuff, to an extreme extent. But someone asked, what sparked the idea for 7 days of Dom? Can't wait for 12 days and for the university as well.
So the days of domination was sparked. So Euphoria, Shayla, and I were already working on the Rehabilitation Center for Insecure Adults at that time. And I think we're like, okay, well, we can't do that in person. Let's work on things. The pandemic hit. And this was like at the end of March. I just come back from London and I probably had the coronavirus. Actually, at that point, don't worry, I quarantined for 2 weeks. But we were like, let's do this thing. We'll do 3 of the days. We'll hire 4 of our friends to do the other 4 days. Let's see if we can make our friends some money. We'll discount it to sex workers. So it's like $25 for them. And we're like, let's try this thing. Worst case scenario, like whatever it may be. And it just blew the fuck up. And like, that's how the best things happen. The best things happen when you're not trying for them, but you're like, let's just try this thing. And then the response was so great. And now it's building up to be something so much bigger than what it was at the start. And the university started the Rehabilitation Center for Insecure Adults. I'm trying to remember of like, what was the onus for that? It probably comes from conversations that we have a lot of heady conversations about social dynamics and different people and like, oh, people really need to understand this. They can't understand doming and consent until they understand the complexities of power. How do we teach this? And then it was also, how do we get around Instagram, Facebook, advertising? We need to have something that is 0% about sex at all, nothing. And like, that was the delineation between that. But I feel like we came up with the idea maybe late last year. It's been a long time in the making, but that's the best I can remember of how that started.
Well, I think everything always starts with like great conversations with friends. And that's sort of like, oh, I'm spotting something, I'm seeing something, I think it's so important. Like community is so important because then that's how everyone kind of talks about like, oh, what can happen, right? And what do we want to talk about and what is missing, right?
Yeah. Or just like the melding of certain minds. I feel like that's what it was when like, because I've been friends with Shayla since our days into the dungeon. And I think Euphoria was at the same dungeon, but not at the same time. And when I had Euphoria on my podcast, and that's when I was like, oh, wow, this chick is so awesome and thinks about things really similarly and gets like way headier than I do. And it was kind of like the excitement of like her mind. It was like, oh, what can we do with all of this?
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I find, so you guys all started together during the same time. Yeah. At the same house.
Yeah. And that doming is such an important part of my life. And the friendships from doming and sex work is such an important part of my life. It kind of rehabilitated my friendship with women specifically. And just, I feel like sex work friendships, it's so ride or die. It's so true and true because it eliminates competition. It's not that, and I know a lot of other types of sex work does have competition, but at least my experience within domination was that we're trying to get our friends money. We're trying to help this person out with whatever. We're cheering them on. We're not saying, oh, you got a session, so therefore I'm not making money. It's that, one of us wins, we all win. And I think just that, like that camaraderie and lack of competition, like these are honestly some of the best friendships of my life. And it really gave me such a strong foundation and understanding of people.
Yeah, I totally agree. Who you kind of like start in the house with, like, I think
that's the idea, right?
Yeah. And a few of my other really good friends who, once they left the house, like I've been in 2 other Dom's wedding, we all started, they started after us and Dia and I trained them. But they became really close friends, former Doms, and like been to 2 of, been in both 2 of people's weddings. And like, so you build these like really great friendships, not only through just like doing this very unconventional thing, but especially in a house, there's a bit of trauma bonding that happens when you deal with like a shitty house too. And then you're like, okay, got to go. But, here are the cool people that like helped me like get through a lot of stuff too. So,
yeah. Yeah, because you really feel like you're thrown in there like cattle. Like it feels like you're being hazed, even though that's just what it is. And I mean, I feel like I was only in there for a blink compared to a lot of my friends, and I recognize the privilege of having like wrestling be my main trade. But it was after a while, well, that's when I got offered a job as a mental health professional to do part-time. And I was like, I'm making more money from wrestling. I enjoy it more. And it's easier with my schedule because the wrestling community it's really all independent. There are some houses here and there.
Super small too, right?
It's very small. It's very niche, but there is a large demand.
Yeah.
Well, because it's like there's a low supply of people that can do that. Because it's not just about being strong; it's about being skilled. So even if you're a bodybuilder, you might not be good at it necessarily.
Yeah, I think there's a huge demand, and it's just like, not many people offer it. So that's a really great niche market for that, right?
Yeah.
Someone asked, what is your fave toy for squirt play? And do you have a signature / fave move when wrestling?
My favorite toy for squirt play is probably my hand. No, I mean, probably my hand. But also I like the air pulsation technology. Those are just great. I like realized this yesterday when I was using a toy that a company sent me, and I was like, oh, I like internally don't have that much sensation like around like until you get to my cervix really. So I'm more all about external toys.
Oh. So like the ones that like do the suction on the clit.
Mm-hmm.
How do those feel? I haven't like I have so many different people, so many friends of mine. There's like, I love it or I hate it, right?
Yeah, and I think that's what it's going to be like too. But I think if you're a person who doesn't like a lot of direct pressure on your clitoris, or if I'm a person who doesn't really like vibration that much, it's nice because it kind of like surrounds your clitoris and then like throws air at it instead of like directly touching it.
Oh, interesting.
So I think
all
it's like
the toys,
yeah.
all the different toys out there for you folks to play with.
And then signature or favorite move wrestling. Well, I mean, triangle is probably my favorite. I love my quads. I love squeezing them on people and choking and making different shapes with them. So I'd say probably a triangle because I can make the tightest shape with it, but scissor holds a close second. And yeah, it's my favorite because you can always get a little bit better at it, but I always like the feeling, like even when I'm masturbating, of squeezing something between my thighs. So that's why I'm like, I was fucking made for wrestling. That is my signature move of like, I love reading the reviews and the wrestling message boards and people being like, her legs are no joke. And I'm like, thank you.
That's amazing. I love the wrestling message boards.
Right? It's so silly.
I think that's so great. I mean, there's just something for everyone out there. If you got a kink, if you got a fantasy, there is
Beauty of the
someone
internet.
out there. Yeah, there is something for someone out there. There's someone for anyone, for anything. And like, that's the great thing. It's like, whatever you need, nowadays you can find it. Whatever toy you can imagine, it most probably exists. Like,
yeah.
Get
and it's fun to
folks.
continue. Like the last time that there was a kink out, I remember it was Sybil Fury and Nico Flux were doing a kitty play scene thing. And I was like, that looks interesting. And I was wearing a fur coat. So I'm like, I'm going to be a kitty with Nico. And after I did it, I was like, wow, that was a lot of fun. I think I want to do this more. So it's like, I'm still discovering new things still all the time.
Oh yeah. I saw the little kitty pen.
It was pretty fun.
Yeah. The pet pen. So I'm going to break this up a little. I have 2 questions. So I think this refers to wrestling. Can a dom make any opponent docile? So it's a very general question, but
Yeah, I'm like, does docile mean unconscious?
Yeah. What do you mean by that?
I mean, I think if it comes to like behavioral correction and things like that too. So that's also a pet peeve of mine in wrestling. I've had clients who were like, they were trying to annoy me, so I would hit them. And I'm like, no, if you want me to hit you, you ask. But if you're trying to annoy me, I'm not going to hit you. I'm just going to leave.
Yeah.
Because guess who has the session money?
Yeah.
So you don't make anyone do anything. I really like, you have to have an agreement with whoever the dom and client is of what's going to happen and what they're after, and they can be able to play into that. There are different types of wrestling, especially when it comes to competitive versus semi-competitive. Semi-competitive, you can resist, but you're not trying to win. And wrestling, fetish, and jujitsu is completely different from like regular wrestling or pro style or any of that. So like, we're not trying to kill each other. It's like, it's a lot of puzzle. It's like a chess match really of different type of moves that we're doing, but it doesn't get like that. It doesn't get that incredibly like violent or aggressive. Like in my most even matches that I've had with clients where, you know, over an hour period, we only did like 3 throws. It was going on for that long. Like they're not that, like we're not even moving that much because it's all about slow maneuvers.
Yeah. So do you actually do very competitive wrestling with clients, or what does that look like?
I don't as much anymore, just because I become more worried about my safety after you deal with a couple people that are like, yeah, let's go competitive. And it's like, also, I'm just getting a tiny bit lazier with it, but usually I'll assess someone's their skill level, because if you don't know jujitsu, I'm probably going to destroy you. If you have a bit of an MMA background, I've just had bad experiences that with clients too, where it's not the same thing as an MMA match, and you cannot treat it that way. And yeah, so I do competitive sometimes, but I much prefer semi-competitive. But basically where I stand now is I don't do competitive with first-time clients. So we have to session, I have to trust you, we have to understand that, and then we could potentially do competitive. But it's such different questions, especially that I ask than like, you know, a regular dom would ask. So I'm like, I need your height and weight. I need your experience level, who you've sessioned with in the past. But like the height and weight thing is so important. And I'm so good at understanding the I guess the ratio with men of like what that height and weight looks like in a person.
Yeah. And because it seems like it can be very scary, right? Like it can.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, because like the danger with wrestling doms is more physical than anything else.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, we have the same kind of safety mechanisms and blacklists and, you know, boards for the girls to go on and talk about, you know, bad clients or time wasters or things like that. But definitely more so like physical. And that's why there's a lot of like, you start from your knees, not necessarily from your feet. Most of the girls that do wrestling fetish, they come from MMA backgrounds and then they start doing this. Very few come from a dominant background and then train and go into wrestling that way.
Got it. Yeah, that makes.
I think that's like that's
sense.
where my specialty is, like trash talk and psychological, and that's why usually people will come to see me, because they want kind of like a dominant experience with wrestling.
Yeah, they want the verbal, you know, which can be missing in someone who just has like maybe an MMA or jiu-jitsu background as like you know, and not the like domination, power dynamics, you know, pro-dom background, which is the fun verbal fantasy of it, right?
Yeah, I've given a lot of monologues in my day.
That's awesome. So we're going to do this as the last question. If you could go back to just starting out in sex work, what would be one piece of advice you would give yourself?
Trust yourself more. I think like at any time, especially when, I mean, there's an intimidation when you come into an industry where people have been doing it for years and they're super pro and you want to act like, you know what you're doing. I think just trusting instincts more, ask for help. Don't be proud.
That's awesome. I think that's really great advice, you know, asking for help and just trusting yourself. Cool. So, you know, for those of you who have been watching, who will be watching later, we have been scrolling Lola Jean's contact information on the bottom. We are now scrolling our Patreon for La Maison de Rouge. If you like our weekly broadcasts and you want to support us, Again, it's a two-person, two-person team. Gia and I do this, we don't get paid for it. And we put a lot of work into running our Periscope for those to get educated and to put this out there. And we're always thankful for our community and our friends who have been gracious enough to come on screen and talk about themselves and talk about their journey. So, feel free to support us on Patreon. This will also, for those of you who are watching live, this will be available on YouTube for forever, unless they kick us off, which is possibly a high chance because they keep taking down our photos. They don't like the photos we use. I don't know why. So we're trying to figure that out right now. But Lola, is there anything else you want to let our audience know about? Any other things you want them to kind of possibly go to, check out before we end our conversation?
Pretty much everything I do can be found at lolajean.com. If you want to, I have some cool squirting merch. If you want to rep it on your shirt, that's where all the event information, you can sign up for my email list there. And the other thing, especially if you are in a lockdown, is I've created something called Velvet Tip Studios, which is custom audio erotica. This is another one of those, how can I make my friends money things? But essentially, if you wanted to have be dommed in an experience or sub or whatever the thing may be, you can listen to that. There are a couple people, I think Empress Wu was one of the people that lended their voice to it, but you can listen and have that experience. And if you want it to be personal, you can get a consultation, pay some extra money to have a specific experience. We had a customer request that someone wanted to have medical play or feel like they were having that done. So the Dom walked them through that of the cold metal and the class to see the speculum and all these different things. So you can experience things when you're locked in your room. I promise you, you just have to use your imagination.
Yeah, that's awesome. Audio erotica, I think, is really awesome. I think most people need to read more erotica and listen to erotica more often and really engage your largest sexual organ, your mind, folks.
Yeah.
Some good, important information and some really great items by Lola Jean. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. Catch us next week, every Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And thank you, Lola Jean, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.